I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who pondered on the purpose of my existence. Is it the pursuit of God? Is it love? Is it money? Is it fame? Or is it sakatagin toki? There are a couple of ways to look at these looming questions. Philosophers like Aristotle and Plato put forward the idea of essentialism and the importance of essence, which is instilled in everything, including us nasty human beings. They believe that an aspect of being good is to adhere to your essence, and you might know your essence or be completely oblivious to it. Later on, scholars question the idea of us having a particular destiny. Friedrich Nietzsche, in particular, thought he would lighten up the conversation by presenting nihilism, the purposelessness of life, which isn't as bleak as it seems, but I'll get to my boy a bit later. While later on, Jean-Paul Sartre took a step back to look at the idea of essence from a new perspective by stating the possibility of humans coming before purpose. So instead of this purpose pre-existing, we are responsible for figuring out our own essence, also known as existentialism. In other words, we don't have a predetermined purpose, and it's up to us to figure out who we are and what our purpose is. But there is a daunting aspect to this. If there are no restrictions, we have this terrifying freedom of creating our own moral code in pursuit of such purpose. As such, he stated that we have to be responsible for our own actions. After this long-ass intro, the anime I'm going to talk about today is probably the darkest, most pessimistic anime I've seen, and as someone who unhealthily seeks out the sort, I can say it probably takes a top spot. There are no comedic reliefs. It's an anime that ponders on the idea of purpose, death, and the annihilation of the human race. It's also one of my favorites. Hey guys, this is Eve of Addis, and today Technolize. I'm going to go all out on this bad boy, so please watch the show before watching this video, as there will be spoilers. I know it's going to be hard watching the show, but please, I assure you it will be worth it at the end. Also, I'm going to try a more in-depth analysis type video, partially to make up for the long-ass breaks I've been taking nowadays. I have no excuse. So some time ago, specifically 3 hours before I started writing the script, the 75th anniversary Doomsday Clock announcement was broadcasted to the world. Link in the doobly-doo. It's basically a metaphorical countdown to our sort of collective, you guessed it, doomsday, where different leading scientists of different disciplines and security experts come together if the time on the iconic clock will change. It uses two questions to decide how close doomsday is. Is humanity safer or at greater risk this year compared to last year, and is humanity safe this year than the 75 years this clock has existed? This year, like last year, the clock was set to 100 seconds to midnight, and no more was Linkin Park playing. And although I watched it because Hank Green, someone I deeply respect, was speaking, this sense of dread reminded me of Technolyze. Technolyze was created by Yasuyuki Ueda, the same person who worked on serial experiments Lain and haibane renmei, which I will make a video of at some point, I swear. It was written by Chiyaki Konaka, who's generally known for his dark, sometimes Lovecraftian type works such as the unfortunately unmade Despera and serial experiments Lain. That is, when he isn't doing Digimon tamers. The characters were designed by the OG, the king himself, Yoshitoshi Abe. To top it all off, the animation was done in Madhouse in its golden days. So clearly this show had a lot going for it. Much like Nier Automata, Technolize is not an easy medium to go through. I gave up on the first episode because I couldn't stomach such bleakness. It tells us how it's going to end in the middle of the show, and it follows through. But after a year or two, I figured I have now braced myself to enjoy the story and went back. Am I better off? I don't know. I'm not alone when I think that Technolize is part of some anthology along with serial experiments Lain and haibane renmei. The most popular theories state that Lain represents insertion, haibane ascension, and Technolize destruction. Although I have my qualms about Lain being closer to rebirth or evolution, and haibane having more of acceptance and forgiveness as a theme, I agree full-heartedly that Technolize is about death of humanity, of reason, and morality. There's no way around it. Technolize at its core is a niche story. It follows Ichise, an ex-boxer who is saved from the brink of death by Doc, who saved him and replaced his lost limbs with prosthetic ones. He then gets caught up in the complicated politics of their city, Lux, a Latin term for light, a contrast to the grim tone that chokes all its inhabitants. The stressed situation stems to an extent from the warring factions of the city who want to be the next to decide the route of the next step and how humans intersect with technology. Although we mainly follow Ichise, the other characters are just essential to the story. Among other things, the show questions if incorporating technology to our lives will continue to be advantageous to our species. What is God's role in the symbiotic relationship? And lastly, it asks if we really have a purpose. It closely follows the death of purpose and reason and what's left of humanity coping with it. What happens to faith and the human tenacity when there's no trace of God or any objective morality left? What happens when we are abandoned? While some of us like to feign ignorance, the characters all come up with some form of answer, which are not as hopeful as we want to believe it is. But on the other hand, it should be noted that these questions matter more than the character's response to them. We may agree or disagree or think we would have done that but in a better way, but ultimately we are thinking of the questions, and I think that's what the show is really trying to do. The show makes its point, but it doesn't leave itself indestructible, almost as if it wants a rise out of us. But it also sets the arguments deep in the world within the anime by sprucing it up with one of the best world building in anime and interesting characters. So I would argue, with the exception of Doc and Toyama, all the other distant characters serve as placeholders for different beliefs and solid characters on their own. They feel cold for some reason, mostly because of the painstakingly slow pace of the anime intentionally, which might not have been the best decision by the creators. Regardless, you will stay engaged and you will take something from the show if you watch it till the end. It's a steep mountain to climb. The slow pacing and the earthy, faded, grim tone didn't always work, but getting to the end made it worthwhile. Like I didn't spend 8 hours of my life binging an anime. Like I mentioned before, the show is set in a very bleak, nihilistic world, and the characters, in a true seinen anime nature, created their own way out of existential nihilism. But instead of individualistic traits, most of the characters represented different responses. But before analyzing their answers, it's better to look at the context first. The humans in the story were divided into two: surface dwellers and Lux City. Above all is a surface, devoid of any real human after everyone lost their will to live, just fading ghosts. We really don't know what happens to humans in the surface to make them that way, but if not social anthropology or behavioral sync, Psychpass gives us some indication. Sadly, or positively, if you're an optimistic, we humans are created with a need to struggle. Neuroscientists have found that struggle play an important role in our brain than we actually think. The people of the surface reached the peak of prosperity and peace with nothing else to achieve or overcome. There was nothing else to survive for. I'll leave a link in the doobly-doo to a pretty interesting article about this, which I think will explain it better than I ever could. The people who were deemed to be dangerous ideas were exiled to the city of Lux to mine raffia, a substance used in cybernetic surgeries. The city is led by the class, an invisible faction created by the founders of the city. The class resides in the obelisk in the middle of Lusk. The obelisk allows the cybernetic limbs to function as well. Though in reality they are a puppet government created by the surface, they were soon left to their own devices. The main goal of the class is to maintain a consistent flow of raffia. No one really knows who the members of the class are, only that they speak through other organizations to reveal their divine truths. The closest idea of the class represented is a dogmatic form of religion. The citizens look up to the class in almost reverence. No one questions them as their word is law, whether you understand it or not. Gabe is another obedience-based organization. They live in the outskirts of the city. Members are wholly devoted to the values of the faction. Each generation of this group bears an oracle, which the members of Gabi are absolutely devoted for. An organization like Gabi, devoid of individuality, represents cult, or a very traditional group of people. Rakan, with its youthful endeavors and basically no real goals, falls in the group of anarchists, a political philosophy and movement that is skeptical of authority and rejects all involuntary, coercive forms of hierarchy. In the context of Technolize, an argument could be made that Rakan is most likely anarchist transhumanism, a philosophy synthesizing anarchism with transhumanism, a movement devoted to promoting the development of robust human enhancement technologies that is concerned with both social and physical freedom. Anarcho-transhumanism defined freedom as expansion of their own ability to experience the world around them, especially towards the end, with arguments being made to what being human really is. The union is what every 15-year-old socialist dreamed themselves to be. They are the revolutionary with the goal of abolishing the cybernetic technology and everyone that uses it. By questioning the depth of mass politics, aka democracy, and philosophy, they seek to free people from the chains of technolization. Okay, I'm being too hard on them, but I wasn't really the fan of their representation in the show, so I won't talk much about them. And last but not least, we have Organo. Moving on. Organo is basically a Yakuza organization. Much like IRL Yakuza, they have a strict code of conduct and presentation, all members wearing sharp suits. Although in principle, all those who are hard workers will be rewarded with power, it's hard to say it really applies, both in real life and within the show. They promote technolization since they value efficiency and structure. Coming to specific characters, we have OC Ichise, the aforementioned Xboxer who doesn't really have any values and isn't really invested in what's happening in the city. His main goal is to continue living. He only joined Organo not to work his way up or because he believes in the Yakuza ideals, but because he was influenced by their charismatic leader, much like me. Although much cannot be said about him as a character, he represents our animalistic desire to continue living, our Freudian id. As such, when staring down existential nihilism, Ichise's answer is our will to survive. Yoshi's story is quite a roller coaster in Technolize standards. He left the surface to orchestrate a civil war to ensure Lux doesn't fall victim to the same plights as the surface. He values the liveliness of Lux, be it violence or what have you, and by instigating chaos within the city, he wanted people to be more determined to live and succeed. And through this conflict, Yoshi wanted new ideas and revolutions to pave way to a better version of Lux. Although humans can only evolve so much, I have seen a couple of people calling him the mind of my pronunciation, the Übermensch or Superman, a Dutch term used by Friedrich Nietzsche meaning the superior man who justifies the existence of the human race. Britannia Dictionary states that he would emerge when any man with superior potential completely masters himself and strikes off conventional herd morality to create his own values. Hence, his answer to existential nihilism is rejecting the way of life designed by the surface by creating his own set of morality, which might not be viewed as civil by some, but meets his goal. So basically, Yoshi is Technolized Jesus. Next, we have Onishi, my love, the director of Organo. By being able to hear what he believes is the voice of the city, he aims to save Lux from war. His cold and collected demeanor is a clear indication of Bushido, the samurai way of life. He upholds the 8 virtues of a true warrior. He is true to himself and tries to be a just person, trying to follow all the ethics that might require. As such, his response to the looming question is Bushido. Next, we have Shinichi. No, I mean Shinichi, the leader of Rakan. His only concern is being free. Youthful endeavors such as drinking and partying take most of his time. Hence, his way of life is a hedonistic one, seeking pleasure above all things. And that is what he throws at existential nihilism. Then we have Ran, the current Gabe's prophet. It's going to be argued that her power really harms her than actually helping. At the end of the day, she's just a kid with this intense responsibility weighing her down because she's the only one who knows the fate of Lux and how it's really unavoidable. What Onishi believes to be the voice of the city is really Ran, guiding him telepathically on what to do. Through this and Ichise, she tries to change the fate of Lux. Her actions and resignation, it can be said that she has similarities to Buddha the Enlightened as someone who wants to change the suffering and burdens of humans. She tries to bring solace to many of the characters by helping them find their own truths, so her answer is monasticism. Next, we have Kano, the leader of the unseen class. Like all, he's trying to reshape looks to his vision, turning everyone to almost fully technolized cyborgs, just to see how far the boundaries of technolization really is. As such, he aims to cast aside humanity. He's the most unstable of our cast of characters, suffering from God complex and questioning if everything is reality or the product of his own mind. His philosophy is absurdism, our inability to find real meaning in this irrational world. Sakamura, like Yoshi, is from the surface. He lives a very simple life, unattached to anything. He doesn't really have any desire to indulge in the ever-changing politics of his city. His non-interference and go-with-the-flow beliefs fall in the Chinese belief of Taoism. This resignation to the way of living in harmony with the Tao is his answer to the crisis at hand. Dog sees technologization as a means of human evolution rather than a medical treatment. While she is calmer and more sympathetic than most, Dog doesn't appear to be completely sane either. She despises the people of the class and doesn't really care for the people of Lux either, only Ichise. She is more of a scientist than a doctor, experimenting the limits of technolization. As a former member of the class who was forced out on the account of her ideological differences with the new ruler, her obsessive research into technolization is ultimately a desire to prove her worth and regain a place amongst those she considers her equals. Regardless of this, she shows a disdain for the class. Furthermore, she is portrayed as having views that can be described as anti-nihilistic. Despite my initial beliefs, it's really hard to put Doc in one school of thought. On one hand, Doc believes in the importance of creating our own meaning as species. She feels we live in what is inherently a meaningless world. Her existential worldview being that we must respond to this artificial evolution of humanity. This belief in the importance of evolution is a direct contrast to the surface people's resignation to the nihilistic world. So she is sort of closer to Nietzsche, but it should be noted that although she left the class, it can't be said she left the ethics. As in, maybe I'm stretching it, but Weber's The Protestant Ethics. And this can be said of her rationalism as well. So I don't really know where the Doc fits. All I can say is that she has various beliefs and flaws as a human being. I think she represents most of us who don't really adhere, at least knowingly, to one school of thought. And this makes sense as she was the only one who really resigned to her fate. When confronted with the reality that not only do her people have no interest in her research, but that human race as we know it is effectively dead, she ultimately breaks down mentally in the face of the pointlessness of her entire life. She really didn't have anything solid to fall back on. Some episodes barely have any dialogue, choosing instead to push the story through grim visuals, while others are so intrinsic and emotional. You won't know what to do with yourself by the end of it. The Madhouse animation has a lot to do with how well this is done. In addition to the beautiful orgasm-inducing animations and fluid movement in the limited fight scenes of the show, the cinematography in the anime is also noteworthy. Each shot is well made. I won't say everything is wallpaper worthy, but it's memorable. It's really interesting to note that the anime mirrors paintings done by Edward Hopper towards the end. I'll leave a couple of links further discussing his art and why it's so significant to Technolize, but let me explain it. His various works, especially Nighthawks, is set to capture the paradox of loneliness in urban life. One article stated that Hopper's masterpiece is an existential crisis on its own right, where a group of individuals fall prey to the isolating stillness of New York City. His pieces feature harsh fluorescent lights in darkened places. It states that the very essence of human vulnerability, capturing the all-consuming solitude of modern life. Even before phones took over any attempt at real human interaction, Hopper's iconic painting reveals our inability to connect in the early 1940s. We as viewers become the silent voyeur, watching the stony expression of Hopper's unreachable subject through a window, with no door to enter enter the diner, we are left outside, embodying the underrepresented role of the lonely New Yorker in her utterly lonesome existence. Behind all the death, drama, and hopelessness, I'd argue that Technolize is a show about rejecting apathy. It would allow us to take solace in how we end, and those who did, like Ichise and Yoshi, were able to die honorably, if a bit lonely, because they rejected said apathy. It showed that the surface people, by absolving to make humans unchanging, by hurting the violent and peaceful people from each other, they doomed both of them to die their own separate death. The peaceful people died from a lack of desire to live, while the violent people died from their own violent tendencies. Although I say this, I don't really know if I came out of the show optimistic. Oftentimes when we depict the end of humanity, we imagine ourselves going out with a glorious bang, or in the arms of those around us. It's a comforting idea where in our final moments we relish in the best of ourselves, and we can share our fate with everyone else. Rarely are we ever responsible for our own reckoning. Even when we think of nuclear Armageddon, it's never us or anyone who we relate to that pulls that trigger. We can always comfortably distance ourselves from our own destruction. Technolize shows us an end that isn't patiently waiting for a sudden disaster to sweep life from beneath us, but a long tormented descent into meaningless, which concludes with a drawn-out lonely death of one man. This is mirrored in the ending song, When Reason Fails. Much like in Hopper's work, loneliness is a choice Ichise makes. Killing Kano might seem like the morally obvious thing to do, but what do morals matter now everyone else is dead? Ichise doesn't even think about this. And that moment, I believe, encompasses the creator's wish to create an actual Superman. A man whose morals matter even when they don't. It's easy to argue that Technolize attempts to demonstrate the futility of self-actualization, that it is the ultimate embodiment of nihilism. But in this scene, it presents you with an arguable truth, that despite everything the show had made you feel up to this point, you still see justice in killing Kano. Ultimately, you are human. So if you're still here, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this review / existential crisis of my own. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. There's so much to dissect in the show, and this video, as inflated as it was, I only did a surface level analysis of the characters, for instance. So again, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!